Can a single new component convert an unstable car into a winning machine? And most importantly, are we seeing Lewis Hamilton's competitive rebirth with Ferrari? The 2025 Austrian Grand Prix was not simply one session more than Saturday. For Lewis Hamilton, it meant a hinge moment, a before and after within its history with Ferrari. After months of complex adaptation, external questions, and a more steep learning curve than expected, something tangible finally happened. Pure performance, measurable, and more importantly, competitive. When the stopwatch marked 1:04.582 when completing his fast lap, Hamilton knew that something had changed. Not only for being fourth, but for the symbolic of the margin, just 90 thousandths behind Charles Leclerc. Throughout the season to that point, the difference between the two had been considerable, especially in classification, where Leclerc was always more comfortable and effective with the SF-25. Austria was the first time that Hamilton managed to neutralize that gap. And that has a huge impact on the internal narrative of the team. But this is not just a matter of tense. It is a matter of sensations, of silences that break in the garage, of a team that begins to believe again. Because what was only promised before, now I had data support. In a sport as meticulous as Formula One, where each millisecond dissects, consistency is more valuable than any motivational discourse. And that was what Hamilton delivered that Saturday. A clear demonstration that his integration with Ferrari was no longer a theory under construction, but a palpable fact. It came from a complicated Friday. Ferrari was off the leaders with a deficit between 6 and 9 tenths, according to Hamilton's own words. In less than 24 hours, that distance evaporated. And that transforms everything. The British body language after getting off the car was different. Less tense. Safer. He got out of the car like who knows what he did. As someone who enjoyed again, even for a moment, of that connection with the machine that characterized him in his best years. The context is also important. The Red Bull Ring is not a circuit that forgives errors. It is short, technical, each curve has a direct impact on the final time. There is no margin for errors. For this reason, highlighting in Austria has a double weight. It is not simply to be ahead. It is doing it in one of the most demanding paths for pilots who are still trying to understand their car. Hamilton reached this GP knowing that each positive signal should be amplified. He knew that the Ferrari project was still under construction. But what happened in Austria was more than a good return. It was a sign of life. It was the first serious chapter of his new stage. Therefore, beyond the place on the grill, what really matters is what it represents. A fracture in the narrative of doubt, a first blow on the table of a pilot who, when he recovers confidence, can completely change the course of a season. Behind each magical return there is engineering. And in this case, what transformed Lewis Hamilton in Austria was not only his skill at the wheel, but a surgical intervention of the Ferrari technical department. Because what we saw in classification was the visible result of a hidden, but fundamental update. A new completely redesigned soil for SF-25. In Formula One, the floor of a modern car is not one more piece. It is the component that defines, to a large extent, the aerodynamic efficiency of the car. It is literally the heart of performance. In the cars of the ground effect era, such as the current ones, 70% of the aerodynamic load is generated from below. So any alteration in that area is not an aesthetic modification. It is a philosophical restructuring of the car. Ferrari did not make a simple correction. What they introduced in Austria was one of the deepest evolutions of the SF-25 since the car was conceived. The new flat background incorporated a renewed geometry into several key points. A total redesign of the frontal fences, those small deflectors that channel the airflow under the car, and an expansion of the Venturi tunnels that longitudinally travel the car. In addition, the central part of the soil to facilitate cleaner channeling towards the diffuser modified the profile of the boat. The edge of the ground, meanwhile, was shortened and reclined with a new angle, looking for greater efficiency in the generation of lateral vortices. And, perhaps the most significant, the diffuser was completely renewed in its internal volume. This rear section, which acts as an air extractor, is key to maintaining the negative pressure under the car and with it paced to the asphalt. The objective was not simply to find more aerodynamic load, but to do it stable. Because a poorly distributed load that appears and disappears along a curve is more harmful than the lack of total load. The big problem of the SF-25 until now had been its unpredictability. A fast car in loose batches, but treacherous in changing conditions or traffic. The new soil sought to solve precisely that, stabilize the behavior of the car, give it consistency. And that was the element that Hamilton needed. Because a pilot of his style, so fine in brake and accelerator control, requires a car that responds with millimeter precision. don't surprise. That is reliable in your mechanical language. The most impressive thing is that the impact was almost immediate. In a single weekend, Ferrari went from being disconnected from leaders to compete to tenths of the pole. The transformation was so drastic that even Hamilton himself, in later statements, was surprised. He himself acknowledged that the previous day were between 6 and 9 tenths from behind. That, in Formula One, is an abyss. And closing it in 24 hours is not something that is seen every day. This type of evolution not only changes speed, changes the morale of the team. Because when a technical improvement delivers direct results, engineers gain trust, pilots get more involved, and internal dynamics exponentially improve. The car ceases to be a load and begins to be an ally. And this is where the dangerous narrative for the rest of the grill is born. If Ferrari has found a floor that gives it consistency, and Hamilton has found confidence to exploit it, then the competitive balance of 2025 could have changed without many still realizing. What in Austria seemed a specific improvement could be the beginning of a new phase. A predictable Ferrari, strong in classification and solid in race, with two pilots capable of squeezing each evolution. Austria not only made a jump in times, it was the validation of a technical idea that, if confirmed in the next rounds, can redefine the season. In Formula One, chronometers tell the objective history. But there is another story just as important that is not measured in thousands or is printed in the results of Saturday. It is the story of what happens within the pilot. And in Austria, that narrative was as powerful as the classification itself. It was the time when Lewis Hamilton felt himself again. Throughout the 2024 season and the beginning of 2025, Hamilton had gone through a transition process full of obstacles. He left Mercedes, the team with which he rode his golden era, to start a new adventure with Ferrari, loaded with history, pressure, and a completely different environment. And that change was not immediate. The first races were rough, plagued by doubts about their performance, about their technical integration, even about their ability to fight to the highest level on a grill where young talents had been pushing strongly. But Austria altered that story. Not only because the car worked, but because for the first time in a long time, Hamilton felt he was again in control. The connection between pilot and machine, something almost spiritual for the great champions, again emerged. He noticed in the gestures, in the way he spoke with the team, in his attitude on the track, where there was a cold tension and analysis, energy, fluidity, and a security that refers to its best years. This has an incalculable value in a pilot like him. Because Hamilton is not just speed. It is trust, its momentum, its presence. When you feel comfortable, your ability to read the race, manage rhythm, take care of tires, or attack at the right time. And if Austria was the point where he began to recover that trust, then we are facing the competitive rebirth of one of the most successful pilots of all time. Lewis himself let him glimpse in his statements. He acknowledged that he had had to adapt his pilot, that he had accepted that learning with Ferrari was going to be longer and more deep than he thought. It is an unusual admission in champions of his caliber, but precisely for that reason he is so powerful. Because demonstrates humility, maturity, and, above all, commitment to the process. It is clear that he no longer competes to prove that it is better than anyone. Now compete to achieve something deeper. Conquer with Ferrari what he achieved with Mercedes. Complete the circle. Rewrite your legacy. And here comes another intangible but fundamental factor, the psychological impact on the team. Seeing Hamilton smile, see him fight equally with Leclerc, have him comfortable in the car, all that has a contagious effect. Ferrari has lived years of ups and downs, but having a pilot of his confident, active, and propositional caliber elevates the entire environment. Technicians, mechanics, strategists, they all work differently when they feel they have a winning letter. That is why this personal rebirth transcends the result of Saturday. It is a spark that can light a completely new dynamic. Because when Hamilton feels comfortable, he starts thinking about the long term. And when such a pilot looks forward with ambition, the rest of the paddock begins to look with respect. In that context, Austria was not a simple respite in the middle of a difficult season. It was the beginning of a new narrative. And if that narrative is held in the next races, we could be facing the principle of something very special. Not only Ferrari's competitive return, but the last great transformation of Lewis Hamilton, in which the pilot and the project merged to create something bigger than both separately. When a classification like Austria ends, many remain alone with the timetable. Who did the pole? Who was left out in Q2? What was the difference between the teammates? But what happened in the Red Bull ring with Lewis Hamilton and Ferrari is something that goes far beyond the numbers. It was a story of redemption, persistence, and silent evolution. Because the great moments do not always arrive accompanied by a trophy. Sometimes the most valuable thing that a pilot can get in a weekend is to recover the faith in his car, in his team, and in himself. Austria marked that exact point in which the pieces began to fit. And not by chance. It was the result of a meticulous combination between first-level engineering, technical leadership, and a precise reading of the competitive moment. But it was also a character of character. From a champion who, far from accommodating in his legacy, chose a new challenge. That he accepted the pain of adaptation, which lowered his head to reliever, and now begins to see the fruits of that sacrifice. Of course, there is a lot of need. A good classification does not guarantee a podium, and a technical evolution does not always translate into victories. But what Austria leaves is a powerful premise. Ferrari is no longer just a promise by 2025. And Hamilton is no longer just an experiment within Maranello. Both begin to function as a coherent entity.